Live from Washington, this is BBC News. U.S. President Donald Trump threatens to cut tech billionaire Elon Musk's government contracts as the feud between the two escalates. The U.S. issues a sweeping new travel ban, barring people from 12 countries and issuing partial restrictions on 7 others. And the NATO chief, Mark Rutte, proposes a major increase in defense spending after the U.S. Defense Secretary warns against the alliance's reliance on Washington. Hello, I'm Carl Nassman. Welcome to the program. We start with the escalating and very public feud between President Donald Trump and Elon Musk less than a week after the tech billionaire left his role at the White House. President Trump is threatening to cut Elon Musk's government contracts. Elon Musk now calling for Donald Trump's impeachment. These are just the latest salvos in what's now a blistering feud between the two men. The dispute has been ramping up since Tuesday. That's when Elon Musk criticized Donald Trump's budget bill, a signature part of his agenda, as, quote, an abomination. Then on Thursday, Donald Trump said he was, quote, very disappointed by those comments. Within hours, Elon Musk had posted on X saying that the president would have lost the election without the billionaire's support. Musk then suggested, without evidence, that President Trump is in the unreleased Epstein files held by the government related to the late billionaire sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. Last year, court documents released by a judge named numerous public figures connected to Epstein, and while Trump was named in one document, being named doesn't indicate any wrongdoing. While running for the White House, Donald Trump had promised to release more files on Epstein, which was done in February. No major new allegations or revelations were found there, but tonight the White House has responded saying, quote, this is an unfortunate episode from Elon, who's unhappy with the one big beautiful bill because it doesn't include the policies he wanted. The president is focused on passing this historic piece of legislation and making our country great again. For more on all that, our senior North America correspondent Anthony Zerker and our technology correspondent Lily Jamali.
We're having a front row seat to a very bitter and very public divorce between the richest man in the world and the most powerful politician in the world, both of whom love to live their life out in the public eye and have some of the biggest megaphones, whether it's the X, the social media site that Elon Musk owns, or the Oval Office and the bully pulpit of the presidency for Donald Trump. This has seemed to have spiraled out of control, although there had been speculation since this relationship began that those two egos could not exist together and that eventually there would be a falling out. Well, here we are, and it happened, as you note, and as your little TikTok through all of these different backs and forths go, shows it just happened so very, very quickly, faster, I think, than most people thought.
Yeah, and speaking of falling and speaking of fast, Lily, at one point this afternoon, you could watch basically in real time the effect that all of this was having on Tesla's stock price.
You absolutely could, and it ended up closing at around 14% lower than when it started, when Tesla shares opened on the day. Just a stunning plunge. And usually you see stock movements like that when something has seriously gone wrong in terms of, an earnings report, maybe a company dramatically missed their numbers on revenue or profits, or perhaps there's an announcement of an investigation into the company for some kind of wrongdoing, maybe macro conditions like the tariff discussion that we've been having for so many months. But this is different. Tesla has almost become like a meme stock. It's, really tied to how investors feel about Elon Musk. And that's great when Elon Musk is doing well, and it's really not great when he finds himself in hot water, as he did today.
Anthony, it's different, obviously, in politics. We don't have a barometer like a stock price, but where do you think Elon Musk's political stock would be right now? He was one of the more popular figures in the Republican Party. Today, he claimed, he was the reason why Donald Trump and the Republicans did as well as they did in the election.
It's getting close to becoming a penny stock, although you rightfully note that he does still have supporters and he does still have people who are acolytes of his, who believe in what he did with all of these different tech companies and believe in what he's calling for, the changes that he's calling for paring down the size of the federal government and the warnings that he's issuing about the size of the national debt and the threat that that will ultimately present to the United States and its ability to afford the things that we care about, whether it's Social Security programs for the elderly, defense spending, and all the other things that the government takes care of. So I think there are still like-minded people, both in Congress and among the public in general, who are going to be on his side. But as far as political standing goes right now, when you've made an enemy of the president of the United States and the opposition party is not your fan either, it's a very precarious position to be in.
Lily, there's another wrinkle here, isn't there? And the president has suggested that he could cut off things like government contracts in terms of SpaceX or his internet company. Elon Musk, meanwhile, threatening to stop working with NASA. I mean, what are the potential fallouts there?
Well, I think the threat from President Trump is easier said than done, because over these last many years, we have seen as NASA, the main space agency here in the United States, has shrunk with private companies, SpaceX being way out in front, really filling the void, doing the things that perhaps once upon a time NASA would have been able to do on its own. And the argument has been that SpaceX can do these things cheaply. And, if they make a mistake, it's not a debacle the way it would have been if NASA were undertaking the same tasks. Space endeavor is in private companies. And SpaceX, again, as I say, is really out in the forefront. You have Blue Origin. Jeff Bezos has that company, a space company there, but it's just nowhere near in terms of the clout, nowhere near SpaceX in terms of its clout and influence. But I think, where Donald Trump does have some leverage is he's given a lot of benefits to Elon Musk since he took office, including regulatory rollbacks that affect Elon Musk's companies, whether it's SpaceX or Tesla or some of the others. And he's also dropped some investigations against those companies, which has also been a huge boon to Elon Musk.
Meanwhile, President Trump has described the countries in his latest travel ban as, quote, out of control, and said the measures can't come soon enough. President Trump's ban will take effect on June 9th, impacting citizens from these 12 countries. People from an additional 7 nations face partial restrictions. The White House calls them common sense restrictions to protect Americans from dangerous foreign actors. Earlier, my colleague Sumi Somaskanda spoke with the Deputy Assistant to the President, Sebastian Gorka, outside the White House.
We're doing this for multiple reasons. Number one, based upon the threat assessment the President tasked out to the Acting National Security Advisor, Marco Rubio, who's Secretary of State, to Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, Director of the FBI, Kash Patel, and others, including Governor Noem, we have ascertained that these nations either are incapable of telling us who is coming to America as citizens from those nations. They don't have the vetting capacity internally to verify that these are peaceful individuals, tourists, students, what have you. It's exactly what we did 8 years ago when we inherited a threat assessment from Obama saying 7 nations cannot vet their citizens. Secondly, amongst the 12, there are horrific figures for visa overstays. One of these nations has a 49% visa overstay rate. Now, this isn't just theoretical or diplomatic or protocol. We're talking about stopping terrorists coming to America to kill Americans.
Let's get more now on Donald Trump's travel ban. We're joined live by Shabnam Lutfi. She's an Iranian-American immigration attorney who challenged Donald Trump's travel ban in his first term back in 2017. Great to have you on the BBC. I just want to get your reaction there to what Sebastian Gorka was saying, the Deputy Assistant to the President, essentially saying that this travel ban is about national security. It's about countries' inabilities to vet people coming into the United States. What do you make of that argument?
Thank you so much for having me. I tend to disagree with the comments specifically because for a lot of immigrant visas to be issued, it's the applicant's burden to provide a police certificate showing that they do not have a criminal record. There is an enormous burden on the applicant to provide birth certificate, police record, medical records, their passport. And if there are some countries where their nationals may have a slightly higher overstay rate than others, that is something that is the responsibility of the U.S. Consular officers to determine whether that person would be an overstay or not. I don't believe that that's something that the country could influence. It is the consular officer who decides. And so to ban entire nations of people would be to not allow a consular officer to do their job, but just to do a blanket denial of all individuals. And that doesn't seem right.
Now, you challenged the original travel ban in the president's first administration. It went through several different iterations. Will you challenge this one? And how strong of a case do you think you might have?
So this iteration of the travel ban, we can call it Travel Ban 4.0, is a bit different and more thought out than the previous one. There certainly is a list of exceptions to individuals who the ban does not apply to, but it still does target a large number of students, potential H-1B individuals, people with extraordinary ability. And the ban, this version does, like the previous version, it has a waiver process. So it remains to be determined whether this waiver process will be a sham, as was the previous one. If we do see that there are no waivers being issued, then of course litigation will certainly be on the table.
You know, last time around in 2017, I remember these scenes outside of airports. We saw protests, we saw confusion. People didn't know if they could get on a plane or not, or if they had traveled to the U.S., could they return? How do you expect this to play out this time around?
Fortunately, I personally don't anticipate having those type of protests at the airports, specifically because the proclamation states that it doesn't apply to green card holders, it doesn't apply to dual nationals who are traveling on a non-banned country. It doesn't apply to anybody who already has a visa issued in their passport. When the situation happened at the airports, it was mostly because we didn't know whether somebody on a plane who was about to land is going to be allowed to enter or not. So I think this time around, they've been more thorough. And so it's just the issuance of the visas, not if you're on a plane, you wouldn't be able to enter.
I just want to pick up on something you said earlier, which was interesting, because there are a lot of exemptions here for various different people. But you were implying potentially that the White House wouldn't follow through on those exemptions, or they wouldn't process the paperwork. What do you mean there?
Well, we're expecting that, for example, the spouse of a U.S. citizen would still be able to have their visa issued and that they would still be able to enter. And if we see that that is not happening, then certainly we would be coming forward with a lawsuit. There's also a waiver provision for people who maybe an exception is not listed in the proclamation, but certainly are deserving of an exception. And we'll be monitoring that to see how many are being issued.
Just briefly, about 30 seconds left here. There were some notable countries that were left off of this restrictions list. One of them is Egypt, where, of course, the recent attack, he was here from Egypt, and also Syria. What did you make of some of the countries not on the list?
Yeah, it's interesting that Egypt is not on the list, particularly given the attack that happened in Colorado. It certainly reminds me of 9/11, when the attacks are from Saudi Arabia and there are changes to immigration laws, but none that result, but none that apply to the nationals of the countries who are responsible for those actions. Okay. It's interesting that Egypt's not on the list.
Yeah. Shadnam Lutfi, we'll have to leave it there. Immigration attorney who challenged Donald Trump's 2017 ban. Great to get your insights on this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Around the world and across the UK, you're watching BBC News.
There comes a moment when the ordinary world fades away and the wild calls your name. This is as wild as you want it. And it's all here. Every trail leads to an adventure, because adventure isn't just about the rush. It's about where it takes you, who you become, and the stories you'll tell. Start your adventure here at Magical Kenya.
In a world where media is evolving faster than ever before,
where stories are shared in bite-sized portions,
influencers change minds,
and news arrives in an instant.
We hear from media insiders on their perspective on the world
and uncover the stories behind the latest trends. Join us for The Media Show on BBC News.
You're live with BBC News. The NATO chief Mark Rutte says he'll propose member countries spend 5% of their economic output on defense. He didn't give a timeline for that military spending. It comes after the U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth warned NATO allies the alliance couldn't rely only on Washington's military might. Mr. Rutte also called for an uptick in spending on, quote, defense and security-related investments like infrastructure and industry. The BBC's defense correspondent Jonathan Beale has more.
Well, Mark Rutte is determined to give Donald Trump a win when NATO leaders meet in The Hague later this month. The US president, of course, has accused European countries essentially of freeloading and says he wants them to increase defense spending to 5% of GDP. Just remember that they did set a goal of reaching the target of 2% of GDP a decade ago, and some countries still haven't made that target, a handful. So it is a huge challenge for countries to ramp up their defense spending, huge pressure on their finances, on their resources, money that could be spent on other things like health, education, transport. But essentially, Mark Rutte believes that he has found a compromise. That compromise means countries would have to spend 3.5% GDP on defence. Many will find that hard. But then the other 1.5 to make it to 5% would come from defence-related expenditure. And to be honest, at the moment, it sounds a bit of a fudge that you can include a number of projects, for example, road building, railways, essentially transport infrastructure that might be used by the army, for example, to move troops around in that 1.5%. So it looks like there will be a deal at the summit in The Hague later this month. It looks like they will get something that Donald Trump will approve of. I mean, the question is, will they deliver it? Because, as I said, the target of 2%, some countries haven't met it. We don't know what the timetable for delivering 5% will be. And there's no doubt that a number of countries, including the UK, will struggle to meet that target.
Now, Israel said it launched a series of airstrikes on the southern suburbs of Lebanon's capital, Beirut, targeting what it called facilities used by Hezbollah to make drones. The Israel Defense Forces issued a statement saying it's, quote, striking terror targets of the Hezbollah aerial unit. It added that evacuation warnings were issued for several buildings. It's the fourth time that Israel has struck Beirut since it reached a ceasefire agreement with Hezbollah last November. Halil al-Hayya, a senior Hamas official, says that the group is ready to engage in a new round of ceasefire negotiations and the talks with mediators are ongoing. Meanwhile, Israel says it's recovered the bodies of 2 hostages that were held in Gaza by the Mujahideen Brigade. It's a smaller militant group operating in the territory. Judy Weinstein Haggai and her husband, Gadi Haggai, both American-Israeli passport holders in their 70s, were murdered during the attack on southern Israel on October 7th. The Israeli government confirmed their deaths about 2 months later. Also in Gaza, 2 aid distribution sites operated by the controversial Gaza Humanitarian Foundation have now resumed following deadly shootings near their facilities. Our Middle East editor, Sebastian Usher, has more on the aid situation in the territory.
The aid situation in Gaza remains dire, but there's been a glimmer of better news, perhaps, in that the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which is this new mechanism that's been backed by Israel and the US, the aim from their perspective to try to avoid Hamas taking the aid so that it can get directly to the Palestinians. This had run into huge problems. 3 days in which Palestinians queuing up in the early hours of the morning had been killed, had been wounded in large numbers. Eyewitnesses, multiple eyewitnesses saying that this was from gunfire from Israeli troops. Denials, mostly from the Israeli army, on most of those counts, although it did concede that on Tuesday morning troops did open fire and what they said was suspects diverging from the main route and posing a threat. For a day, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation closed its operations. No sites were open to deliver aid to Palestinians. The aim was to try and ensure that the security would be better, that the delivery of aid would be more efficient. This afternoon, 2 of those sites reopened. The Gaza Humanitarian Foundation says that around 1.5 million individual meals were given to Palestinians who came to the site. Around 27 truckloads delivered that aid. The big question now is, will this new foundation be able to develop more sites across Gaza to meet the needs, the huge needs that there are across the whole of the Strip, that just 4 sites is clear it can't meet? Will other ways in which aid is being brought in, around 100 trucks come in for a different mechanism each day. They come to warehouses, but there have been big problems with those as well, with looting, with violence. The Labour Union of Truck Drivers in Gaza essentially said that they couldn't work under those conditions. So there are very, very big problems still about aid in Gaza, where the people, after 11 weeks of an Israeli blockade, are in desperate need of any supplies that they can get. UN aid agencies, UN officials are saying that even this amount of aid, if it is up and running, if it isn't marred by the sort of violence that we've seen, isn't anywhere near enough what's necessary.
Frank Lowenstein joins me now, former U.S. Special Envoy for Israeli-Palestinian negotiations. I want to start with those Israeli strikes on Beirut. Israel saying Hezbollah has been producing drones. How significant is it, do you think, to see that conflict potentially starting to boil up once again?
Well, it really is cause for grave concern. I think the Israelis have a delicate balancing act there. Of course, everybody would like to prevent Hezbollah from rearming. At the same time, if you attack sites with civilians in them, you risk a lot of blowback against the democratically elected government there. So I would hope they would err on the side of trying to find a way to address those issues without attacking civilian areas. But at least in this case, it seems like they did everything they could to get civilians out of the way.
Meanwhile, in Gaza, and we were just hearing about that, really a chaotic rollout of this Gaza Humanitarian Foundation's work there, several shootings, multiple different days. Do you think it's time to rethink that process?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's heartbreaking to see people standing online just trying to get food for their families being killed. It's just it's an intolerable situation there. I just don't see any indication so far that this Gaza Humanitarian Foundation is anywhere near up to the task of feeding 2 million people. I mean, 2 sites, 4 sites. There used to be 400 sites, right? 27 trucks. There used to be 500 trucks. So I'm just concerned that even if this works as well as they hope it will, it still will be totally inadequate to the task at hand.
And Frank, I think this was something that maybe was missed just given all the headlines recently, but there was a UN resolution calling for an unconditional ceasefire as well as the lifting of all restrictions on aid. It was vetoed by the U.S. because it didn't tie those conditions to the release of hostages. But what do you think that veto maybe sends about, or what does it say about where the U.S. stands right now compared to all the other countries who voted for it?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're extremely isolated, and certainly the Israelis are when it comes to the war in Gaza. The UN is not the preferred way to deal with these kind of problems from the United States perspective. Under President Obama, of course, we allowed a resolution to pass declaring settlements to be illegal, but that's really the exception. For the most part, we try to decide these issues, directly between the parties rather than at the UN. But it does put us in a very awkward situation in terms of our isolation from the rest of the world.
We also saw this interesting statement coming from a top Hamas official saying, look, we haven't actually outright rejected the latest deal put forth by Special Envoy Witkoff. They want some changes. Help us read between the lines here. What do you think Hamas is trying to signal? Are they still in this process? Are they willing to negotiate?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think the fundamental issue that is unresolved is whether this is really going to end the war or not, this ceasefire. And I think what Witkoff and his team are doing are trying to find language that both sides could live with while interpreting differently. And it's just we tried to do that in the Gaza ceasefire negotiations in 2014. And at some point, it's just difficult to fool either side or to give either side, a plausible way to argue that their position is reflected in that agreement. So I think in some cases here, I think there's a real intention on both sides to try to work it out. But unless and until that fundamental disagreement is resolved, it's hard to see how they're going to get that reach agreement on that. I will say one other thing quickly, though, which is the Israeli coalition may be on the verge of collapsing. Netanyahu's coalition may collapse. In which case, some of the extremists who have really stood in the way of a ceasefire agreement may find themselves out of power, in which case the Israelis may be far more amenable to a resolution that ended the war than they are currently.
How imminent do you think that kind of domestic political collapse could be?
Well, I think probably in the next couple of weeks we'll know. They're going to give one more opportunity to try to resolve the issue with which regards the service of the ultra-Orthodox in the military. If that doesn't work, I think the coalition will collapse. Now, the elections wouldn't be for 2 or 3 months after that, so it's a little bit difficult to know exactly how that's going to impact the negotiations. But I think anything that disempowers the most extreme elements of Netanyahu's current coalition would augur well for the prospects of a long-term ceasefire.
Frank Lowenstein, always great to get your insights, former U.S. Special Envoy for Israeli-Palestinian negotiations. Thank you very much for being on with us tonight. And just a reminder before we go, you can always get the latest headlines on our website. That's bbc.com/news. We have the latest on that ongoing development, that ongoing spat between President Trump and Elon Musk. I'm Carl Nassman in Washington. Stay with us. Lots more right here on BBC News.
Hello, some hot weather in the outlook for many southern and southeastern parts of Europe over the next few days. Also, though, some showers and storms. This frontal system moving eastwards for Friday, generating some severe thunderstorms across some eastern parts of Europe. This next frontal system following on from the west, again, that breaking down into some quite intense thunderstorms as we go through Friday afternoon. But further south and further east, it is all about the sunshine and the heat. 36 degrees there in Nicosia for Friday afternoon, 34 in Athens, middle 30s across parts of the Balkans, well above the norm for this time of year. Spain and Portugal will also be turning hotter over the next few days, but further north we will see showers or longer spells of rain. Will often be quite windy, and it does look particularly windy across southern parts of the UK as we head into the start of the weekend. Low pressure bringing some really heavy thundery showers with some large hail. Could see gales around some exposed coasts, and that's showery and blustery weather extending through northern France and the Low Countries. Also some showers dropping southwards across Germany towards the Alps. But in Spain and Portugal, temperatures will be climbing. 34 degrees in Madrid on Monday, but some southern parts of Spain are likely to get into the low 40s Celsius. Berlin will see showers at times, but in Athens we stick with lots of sunshine and highs of 34 degrees.
There comes a moment when the ordinary world fades away and the wild calls your name. This is as wild as you want it. And it's all here. Every trail leads to an adventure, because adventure isn't just about the rush. It's about where it takes you, who you become, and the stories you'll tell. Start your adventure here at Magical Kenya.
I will give away the vast majority of my money. It's my full-time focus for the rest of my life.
Every time I lost, I just did a deep dive into the reason why we lost.
Und wenn Menschen bei uns in Europa angekommen sind, dann finde ich, haben sie ein Recht darauf, menschlich behandelt zu werden.
When the big names talk, they talk to us. Disinformation.
There is no climate change.
You think you're winning.
The pandemic wasn't real.
Fooling people in the most sophisticated ways.
The Met Police. Social media posts.
You fueled hate and confusion. And you make our job seem almost impossible.
Fake news.
Almost. You see, it's because of you we get up in the morning and work through the night, all over the world. The more you try to drown out reality, the harder we'll work to verify the facts. We will find your sleights of hand and expose them. So no matter how hard it gets, we'll never give up. We'll be watching. We'll be ready. It's the pursuit of truth that gives us our calling. The fight for truth is on.
BBC News exploring the latest innovation and technology shaping our lives, and with the inside track on global trends and advancements in the tech space today. From AI and robotics to health, climate, transport and gaming. Tech Now.
I'm brilliant, but I'm a nervous wreck speaking. I can clone myself and have my clone be a layer between me and the real person.
So the violin itself is 13 microns wide and 40 microns tall. This is 1,000,000,000th of a meter.
What we keep hearing from people is, oh, you know, I work in tech, believe me, it's not being deleted.
Then that's unlawful, and there will be consequences for that.
This futuristic building is a next-generation research